Hi everyone, my name's Kristie Manning. I'm a pediatrician in San Francisco. I take care of kids from the newborn age to 18 years old who have been admitted to the hospital, so I'm what they call a hospitalist. And as a hospitalist, I tend to see really sad things happen to good kids, and many times these things are preventable. So I'm here today to talk to you and help you understand more about preventable accidents due to drug overdoses. Now, you guys have probably heard talks before about illegal drugs such as cocaine and ecstasy. But what I want to focus on today is what people don't think about with drugs that you can overdose on and die from, and that's prescription drugs. Specifically, I'm going to focus on painkillers, but the dangers of using prescription drugs recreationally apply to all types of drugs, even something as seemingly harmless as cough syrup. So first I want to tell you about a young man I knew named Kyle. Kyle was the kind of guy who lit up a room when he entered it. He was genuine, sensitive, caring, and just a fun guy. He grew up in Pleasanton and had a loving family who provided him with every opportunity he could hope for. He went to Amador Valley High School, played for their lacrosse team, and had built up a strong group of friends. He was popular in high school, but as one friend described, Kyle had befriended him in art class when he was new to the school. Even though Kyle sat at a different table at lunch, he stopped over the friend's table every day to say hi. He said Kyle taught him what true friendship is, and never to judge a book by its cover. Kyle made many impressions like this on people. He graduated Amador and attended Arizona State University for college. He majored in computer information systems. During a summer internship, he met the love of his life, Allison. As a couple, they were so cute and perfect, it almost made you sick. After college, Kyle got a job as an application consultant. He did so well, they wanted to graduate him early from the new hire program and give him his own accounts. In his spare time, Kyle was writing a screenplay and was the developer of a website that was gaining popularity and really looked like it might take off. Kyle was a worrier, though. He often shared with his family his concerns for a friend in college who'd become addicted to cocaine. He saw how hard this friend struggled and swore never to touch the stuff. He also had two friends back home that had begun using prescription painkillers recreationally. He didn't know how to help them other than to just be their friend. This is what makes what happened to Kyle all the more upsetting. Kyle often came home on the weekends from Sacramento, where he worked, because Allison lived in Santa Clara, and it was an easy in-between point. So in the first weekend of June 2010, Kyle came home. This time he had a walking boot on because the weekend before, he broke his ankle playing football with friends. That Saturday was one of the first really warm days of the year, and he invited Allison and several friends to his parents' backyard to go swimming and lay out. He bought some beers, and his friends and he lounged by the pool drinking. It turns out his ankle was really bothering him, so he asked one of his friends who used painkillers if he could have a Norco for the pain. Knowing Allison would be upset that he took this, he pulled her aside and explained he needed one for his ankle. The crew eventually went out to a bar that evening and stayed until close. Kyle, Allison, and Kyle's two friends returned to his parents' house. Allison went to bed around 2 a.m., and Kyle and his two friends stayed up a bit longer. Kyle told Allison goodnight and that he loved her. Allison woke up around 8 a.m. and noticed that Kyle wasn't in his bed. She went to the TV room and found him on the couch. As she tried to arouse him, she felt his cold face. And when she turned him over, she discovered he was dead. The paramedics later said, based on his appearance, he'd likely been like that for hours. His friends never provided more details than what I've provided, but his autopsy was positive for large levels of alcohol, hydrocodone, and oxymorphone. Hydrocodone is a narcotic, and one of the brand names is Norco. And oxymorphone is also a narcotic, and its brand name is Opana. Both are in the same family as morphine and heroin, and are commonly prescribed painkillers. His friends were likely addicted to these, and the assumption is that they provided them to him to manage his ankle pain. I want you to see from this story that Kyle was not a druggie. He was a good person who befriended kids that played around with drugs. I want to take a couple points from this story and educate you all on the risks of painkillers, so none of you make the same fatal decision that Kyle made that night. So first of all, how many of you have been prescribed painkillers before? Maybe for an injury or a surgery, like wisdom teeth removal, or you know someone who has. And how many of you still have some lying around? Or maybe your parents do. And truthfully, how many of you would give a friend a pain pill if you had one and they were in pain, say from an injury? So do you guys know what one of the most commonly abused painkillers is? Is it A, Adderall, B, Valium, C, OxyContin, or D, Xanax? Well, it's not Adderall, that's an ADHD medication. It's not Valium, that's a muscle relaxant. And it's not Xanax, that's used for anxiety. It's C, OxyContin, which you guys might have heard of before. The other three are commonly used prescription drugs, just not painkillers. Can you guys name other narcotic painkillers that you may have heard of? So let's talk about all the oral narcotic painkillers that are out there on the market, both their generic and brand names. There's MS-Contin, its generic name is morphine. Codeine. Dilaudid, its generic name is hydromorphone. Vicodin, its generic name is hydrocodone, and this is a commonly prescribed category. Other brand names in this category are Norco, Lortab, Lorcet, and Panicet. And then a little bit stronger than that category is OxyContin. Its generic name is oxycodone. And other brand names in that category are Oxy-IR, Percocet, Roxycodone, and Percodan. And even stronger than that is Opana. Its generic name is oxymorphone. And then there's methadone. It's commonly used for heroin addicts because it helps them wean off of heroin because it's long-acting, so it doesn't have as many withdrawal symptoms. So painkillers travel through the bloodstream to our brain and exert their effects there, significantly reducing our perception of pain. The way they do this is that they're swallowed, absorbed in our guts, broken down into their active form in the liver, and released into the circulating blood. Painkillers act on specific receptors that we have located throughout our body, including our brain. Of note, they don't get rid of the problem causing the pain, just our brain's perception of the pain. So I've listed here some major side effects of painkillers, and some people experience these so badly that they can't tolerate the pills, and often those people are experiencing nausea, vomiting, constipation, or itching. You can also get dry mouth, hallucinations, dizziness, drowsiness, and delirium. But what I put here in bold is euphoria, because that's the most common reason for abuse. And if you don't know, that's a feeling that's described as this light, happy, floating in the clouds, like feeling when you don't have a care in the world. So does anyone here know how we breathe? Like, how do you know when to breathe? And how about when we sleep? How do we know when to breathe then? The respiratory center is in our brainstem, which I've circled here in red. It contains cells that tell us to breathe. It controls the rate and depth of respiratory movements of the diaphragm and other respiratory muscles. This type of control is an involuntary control, meaning you don't have to think about it to do it. Are you thinking about breathing right now? We do have voluntary control in our upper brain structures when we're awake and actively telling ourselves to breathe. For instance, take a deep breath. You've just used your upper brain structures to tell yourself to breathe in a certain way. One of the major side effects of painkillers is what we in medicine call respiratory depression. What we're referring to is the drug's effects on the cells in the respiratory center through receptors that are located there. These drugs basically bind to those receptors and tell the respiratory center to slow down or stop breathing. Higher doses of the drug can cause more slowing and can eventually cause you to stop breathing and die. If you're awake, you can use your upper brain structures, as I mentioned before, to actively tell yourself to breathe. But once you fall asleep, you only have the cells in the respiratory center to tell you to breathe. And if these drugs are telling the respiratory cells to not breathe, you can see how this can be deadly. The problem is painkillers also make us extremely drowsy and can cause you to sleep so deeply that nothing's going to wake you up, not even a lack of oxygen. Once you fall asleep, you're completely dependent on your respiratory center to continue your breathing, and without it, your breathing will eventually slow and then stop altogether. Without breathing, you don't have oxygen, and without oxygen, your heart can't pump. And with no blood pumping through your body shuts down and eventually dies. Now, there are other substances, including commonly abused prescription drugs, that act on the respiratory center the same way painkillers do. There's alcohol, a class of drugs called benzodiazepines with brand names that you may recognize. Valium is a muscle relaxant. Ativan, Xanax, and Klonopin are used for anxiety. And Rohypnol is actually the date rape drug. There's GHB, a class of drugs called barbiturates, which were more commonly used and abused before benzodiazepines were on the market. Their street names are Downers, Yellow Jackets, Purple Hearts, and Pink Ladies. And then there's other sedatives, such as some of the newer sleeping medications, Ambien and Lunesta, and also marijuana and Benadryl. So this problem multiplies if you happen to be mixing these substances, and people are often consuming alcohol and taking these pills. And it doesn't necessarily take too much of either one to stop your breathing. Several prescription drugs have short half-lives, meaning you're going to need to take these pills frequently throughout the day to control your symptoms. Extended release tablets were created to overcome this problem. The pill gets absorbed slowly so that one pill can last you most of the day. But these pills are sensitive to anything that destroys this special mechanism, such as breaking them, chewing them, crushing them, or dissolving them. That's going to cause a massive release of drugs in your system of potentially deadly doses. And the common way people abuse these types of pills are to crush them and snort them, giving you this massive dose all at once. So all it takes is someone to hand you a broken, extended release pill that was originally made to give you small doses over an extended period of time, but since it's broken, will give you a large, potentially deadly dose in your system. Tolerance is the process through which receptors in your body that the prescription drugs bind to become desensitized and intolerant to their effect. Therefore, you're going to need larger doses for the same effect. So if you're going for that feeling of euphoria and you get it that first time, each time you're probably going to have to take more and more to get that same feeling, because tolerance to the commonly abused prescription drugs is often fairly rapid. And using OxyContin as an example, I've listed all the doses on the market. Now, if a kid comes into the hospital and is in pain and has never used painkillers before, I'm going to start out by prescribing them the 10 milligram dose. And that's a pretty standard dose, even for adults. If their pain continues, and I can see that they're not too drowsy and their breathing hasn't slowed down, I can gradually increase the dose. People that are abusing OxyContin are usually consuming the 80 milligram pills. So one pill is 8 times the starting dose for someone who's never used painkillers before. And because of the process of tolerance, those abusing OxyContin can handle the 80 milligram pill. But if they hand that pill to a friend who's never used before, you can see how one pill can actually be deadly. Addiction is defined as poor control over drug use, compulsive drug use, continued use of a drug despite physical, mental, and/or social harm, and a craving for the drug. Addiction is a disease that affects your brain and your behavior. You have control over your choice to start using drugs, but once you start, their pleasurable effects make you want to keep using them. And over time, your brain actually changes in certain ways so that a powerful urge to use drugs controls your behavior. Physical dependence is the body's adaptation to a particular drug. In other words, the individual's body gets used to receiving regular doses of a certain medication and thinks it needs it just to function normally. And when the medication suddenly stopped or the amount is reduced too quickly, the person will experience withdrawal symptoms. Common withdrawal symptoms to painkillers are restlessness, muscle and bone pain, insomnia, diarrhea, vomiting, cold flashes, and involuntary leg movements. Genes can determine addiction. One study discovered that if a parent has a drug or alcohol addiction, the child has an 8 times greater chance of developing an addiction. So because of one's genetic makeup, they may be someone who feels sick from a drug, while it makes other people feel good. They also may be someone who becomes addicted right away and struggles with severe withdrawal symptoms. So while you think you're just out having a good time with friends and maybe wanting to try these pills, you might be setting yourself up for addiction. And I think it's safe to say that no one who's ever been addicted started out with the intent of becoming addicted. So in 2010, approximately 7 million people aged 12 or older met the criteria for dependence or abuse involving non-medical use of prescription drugs. That's about equal to the populations of San Francisco, San Jose, Los Angeles, and San Diego combined. And those aged 25 or younger had higher rates of dependence or abuse than those 26 or older. Another study showed that if you started using drugs before age 16 compared to those who were 16 or older, you had higher rates of dependence or abuse. And one theory behind that is that in the younger brains, they're still developing and nerve pathways are still forming. And if you introduce these drugs during that time, the brain literally becomes wired to think it needs it just to survive. In 2010, of the estimated 3 million people aged 12 or older who started using drugs for the first time in the past year, a majority reported their first drug was marijuana at 62%. But nearly 1/4 initiated with prescription drugs. And just pain relievers alone were the second most popular drug that people used for the first time, at about 17%. The previous chart was for anyone 12 or older, and focused on those who just started using drugs that year. But if you just focus on adolescents in a given year, no matter how long they've been using, these are the drugs they're using. Prescription and over-the-counter medications, seen here in orange, account for most of the commonly abused illicit drugs by high school seniors. Nearly 1 in 12 are abusing Vicodin, and 1 in 20 are abusing OxyContin. So what do you guys think is the most common way people are obtaining painkillers? A, drug dealers, B, friends and family, C, stealing, or D, their own doctor? It's actually B, friends and family. And this chart illustrates that. So this is among people aged 12 or older in 2009 to 2010 who used painkillers in the past 12 months. About 55% got them from a friend or relative for free. About 17% got them from a prescription from one doctor. 11% bought them from a friend or relative. Almost 5% took them from a friend or relative without asking. About 4% got them from a drug dealer or stranger. And 0.4% bought them on the internet. This chart shows how the deaths each year from 1999 to 2008 from narcotic painkiller overdoses are increasing and is an example of the increasing epidemic in our country. And for first-time offenders, the maximum penalty for selling prescription drugs or furnishing them to another person is 5 years in state prison. So that goes back to that question I asked you guys before. If you would give a painkiller to a friend who was in pain, if you had one, and I just want you guys to keep this in mind if anything were to happen to that friend. So prescription drugs are just as deadly as street drugs, just as addictive, just as illegal if you're taking them without a prescription. And just because a doctor prescribes these doesn't mean they can't be abused. As you can see from Kyle's story, it only takes one time of trying them to kill you. So now that we've talked about the problems with abusing painkillers, I wanted to show you a video highlighting the epidemic that's out there. It's a trailer to a documentary done by Current TV called Gateway to Heroin. I encourage you to go home and watch the whole video, which you can find online.
He was a high school football star, coming of age in the suburbs of Boston.
I think he had talent, natural talent.
She was growing up just a few miles away in a quiet middle-class community.
You're beautiful here.
Today, both are battling addictions to heroin. Their story seemingly so unlikely, and yet increasingly common here in the heart of New England. Massachusetts is now reeling from a new drug epidemic, born from another.
We can knock on every apartment and ask them if they've been affected by OxyContin, and I guarantee you, every answer will be yes.
I don't think I've met anybody under the age of 30 that's a heroin addict that did not start out using oxycodone or OxyContin.
OxyContin is a national problem, but Oxy's effect on the population of Massachusetts, particularly its young people, has been nothing short of devastating.
He was limp, he was blue. I mean, not just his lips were blue, his face was blue.
Here, OxyContin has emerged as a gateway drug, leading users down a slippery slope to more potent and more dangerous narcotics.
He shoots heroin, he shoots heroin, she shoots heroin.
Overdoses and even deaths are mounting as authorities point to estates drowning in an endless stream of pills that they say are coming into Massachusetts from another state.
These pills here all came from Florida.
2 years ago, I traveled to Florida to file a report called the OxyContin Express.
So it's easier to get it here.
Yeah. They just give you what you want.
Now, I'm back on the train.
He's pulling out a gun right now.
And following it as it barrels through the northeast corridor.
You guys from Boston?
With no signs of slowing down anytime soon.
I know my talks focused on painkillers, but they are the same ingredient as heroin. They affect your brain in the same way. As described in this video, painkillers are the gateway to heroin. The guy they focused on in the video was prescribed OxyContin after a football accident. He became addicted immediately, began snorting crushed pills, and after his doctor cut off his prescriptions, he was spending about $500 a day because the cost on the street for these pills is about $60 to $80 each. He quickly found that for only $40, he could get heroin and still have some left over because it was so potent. So what I hope you guys get from this talk is a familiarity with the different types of painkillers, an understanding of how they treat pain, an understanding of their common and deadly side effects, what can happen when you mix drugs and alcohol, why some individuals can tolerate higher doses of painkillers while you might not be able to, and how different formulations of painkillers can result in deadly consequences. So I hope you guys all learned something today from my talk. If I can save one life by addressing young people like yourselves, then maybe Kyle didn't die in vain. One thing I didn't tell you before was that Kyle was my baby brother. He was only 23 when he died. He is missed every second of every day by his parents, his siblings, his girlfriend, his grandmother, and his many, many friends. So I hope you guys can take a moment to think about how you'd feel if you lost someone to something that could have been prevented. Now I want you to imagine how your friends and family would feel if they lost you. Imagine some stupid decision you made that changed their lives forever. Imagine how Kyle must feel if he could see the scenes that played out on June 6, 2010, when at 9:07 a.m., his big sister's cell phone rang, and she noticed his girlfriend Allison's name come up. When a hysterical Allison could only repeat, "Kristie, you need to come home. Something's happened to Kyle." I'm not allowed to tell you. They said they want to make sure you drive safely. How when Kristie finally forced Allison to put "they" on the phone, a man's voice simply said, "Kyle's dead." When his family's home looked like a scene out of a crime show. When his family had to sit downstairs while he lay dead upstairs. Because what they don't tell you on those crime shows is that the coroner doesn't come right away. And that day it took 3 hours for the coroner to come take him from his home forever. When his beloved older brother Ryan did not join the rest of the family in the backyard, who couldn't bear to see him in a body bag, but rather felt it was his duty as the older brother to watch over Kyle as he was taken away. When his dad had to sit on a 5-hour plane ride and write his eulogy on the plane. When on that Sunday night, his family, who typically would have all sat at the table for family dinner, instead sat at the table to make his funeral arrangements and try to decide if Kyle would rather be buried or cremated, because it never occurred to them to ask. And lastly, when his friends and family visited his gravesite to honor his 24th and 25th birthday. I promise you, if Kyle could see all that happened after that one stupid decision he made, nobody would be more mad at him than him.
Huh? How old are you, Kaka? No. How many? How many? How many? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, what's your name? Tell Daddy your name. Huh?
Kyle.
Kyle what?
Kyle Manning.
No, what? Kyle what?
Kyle Manning.
What was it? Kyle.
Manning. Kyle Manning.
Let me hear it. Let me hear it again. What is it?
Kyle Manning.
Yeah. And he's coming pretty soon.
And Peggy.
And who else?
And Grandma.
Who else?
And Chuck. Huh?
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus. Take pictures.
Huh?
Take picture.
I did take a picture.
Oh,
Careful. Huh?
Making sound.
Did you look both ways?
Yeah.
Look both ways one more time. Go quick. Wave goodbye to Daddy.
Huh?
You should wave goodbye to Daddy.
Huh?
Wave goodbye to Daddy.
Bye.
We'll see you later.